Do you see that as a key part of your offshore focus, or do you see exploration also as part of some of the onshore assets? I mean, some of the onshore assets, Equinor has kind of scaled back. So I'm curious, within oil and gas, where's the relative focus or emphasis now?
Our focus right now is offshore oil and gas, not exploring for onshore. But we, obviously we do have onshore positions here in the U.S., but we're not focused on exploration onshore. Okay. And in offshore oil and gas, what's happened to momentum more broadly, not just at Equinor? Do you sense that there is a spring back in the step in offshore oil and gas? Because the attention to a large extent over the last decade probably has been dominated by onshore. Of course, we've seen big projects come up in the Gulf of Mexico. You guys have brought some capacity on, Chevron's brought some capacity on, BP has. But I'm curious as to coming out of the pandemic with these oil prices going back up, like what's happening on a relative basis in offshore oil and gas? I don't think our focus on exploration has wavered. I think we've continued to have a strong portfolio for exploration. I mean, obviously our activity level in COVID was very different for all the companies for all the right reasons. So we've always seen exploration as being a driver, either through organic or through business development, bringing on new barrels. So we have to continue to fill that pipeline. We used to be in 30 countries, so that's probably what's changed for us. It's really now more of a focus. So going from 30 countries, we're now in 12, with 6 of those kind of being core. And so it's, and I think a lot of companies are similar to this, really trying to look at where we can get the most value, not just looking at volume. We've had this philosophy for a long time, but I think it's become even more predominant now, and we categorize value a little bit differently. It's not just revenue, but also in terms of emissions. So we have to think about it in both dimensions. So that takes you quite naturally to proven prolific basins, which we happen to be in one of those. Yeah. So Sheldon, exploration returning or continuing to stay in focus is music to your ears, I'm sure, at CMG, but you're also based in Canada, so I want to understand a little bit what's happening with heavy oil and oil sands. I guess what's new there?
Well, a lot of different things, I guess. First off, heavy oil, and whether you're talking in situ or you're talking mining, gets a lot of visibility, sometimes positive, sometimes not as positive as we'd like. But something the industry and the public usually is broadly unaware of is the amount of emission reduction efforts that the industry has taken and continues to take. And whether it's on the mining side, or let's talk specifically the SAGD side, we work with a lot of clients who are not just researching, but making use of solvents to reduce their use of steam, which of course reduces their emissions and obviously their operational costs. And so, we're modeling that for them to ensure they optimize their recovery. We're also working with another company that is looking at downhole technology that will completely negate the need of any steam for SAGD operations. So that's a step change in how SAGD recovery would occur, and of course the resulting emissions reduction efforts from that, and reduction in operating costs, and we're ready to go. We're able to model that for them. We're just waiting for their field results so we can flip the switch. And a lot of these operators are also involved in carbon sequestration efforts in Canada. There's 25, just in the province of Alberta, there's at least 25 projects that are either in progress or being applied for, and we're working with all of those members, and some of them are consortiums, some of them are individual members that are involved in heavy oil, and some aren't. We were involved in Shell's Quest project, which probably most people here are familiar with. They spent over $1 billion, over 1 million tons of CO2 captured every year. And so that's something that we model for our clients in Canada. So they're pretty aggressive efforts in reducing emissions and capturing carbon in Western Canada right now. That's probably the focus, main focus for a lot of operators at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Maryam, coming back closer, you lease quite a bit of acreage there, so what's happening in Permian? How do you guys see Permian? What are some of your I guess, tenants doing? What's interesting there?
Sure. So I'll echo a lot of the sentiments I think that you and your team have showed. That Permian is attracting a lot of activity, a lot of capital. It's a very active area. We're seeing, both public and private companies committing capital to that. We've had a really strong couple of years on the university lands, and the Permian, I think, is doing really well. We expect that to continue here in the next 12 to 18 months. I think the real key for our operators is finding technology improvements or efficiency improvements to counter the increasing service costs. So what we're hearing is that anywhere from 20 to 40% cost increases in their drilling and completions, which, in some of the areas, I think their returns can take it. In some of the areas that are a bit more marginal, or where they're still finding the right formula for how to make really strong productive wells, that can really be a challenge. So we're seeing operators really rise to that challenge and try new things. We still think the real key to developing the Permian, and this is really true, I think, for a lot of the shale developments, is co-development. So the more that you can get size and scale, and I think you're seeing operators do that through consolidation. The more that you can get that scale in that inventory, the better efficiencies you can have on a cost side, and the more you can co-develop or do large pad size development and counter the possible impacts of parent-child impacts laterally, but also on a vertical basis. If you can commit to co-developing, I think, multiple zones at once, you'll see stronger performance out of those and more value out of your acreage. So those are really, I think, the trends we're seeing both in the Permian and in shales in general. But on university lands, we had a lot of consolidation, a lot of transactions happening on our lands really 18 months to 2 years ago. That slowed down some, and from our perspective, it's a real positive, because in our more prolific basins, the Northern Midland Basin and in the Delaware, that means that we've had really strong operator stability. And so operators are committing, and they're moving forward on their plans to drill out their inventory. You mentioned, and I think your colleague mentioned as well, that there have been some concerns on inventory and tier 1 inventory. We keep a close eye on that. So, we don't buy or sell acreage. We are committed to the 2.1 million acres that we manage for the University of Texas and A&M systems, and about 1 million of acres of that is productive oil and gas acreage. And so we do watch what the trends are on the productivity, on the type curves. From our perspective, what we expected type curve wise is what we're seeing, and so we haven't seen that downgrading of drilling inventory, and from what we can see, we have a pretty robust inventory on university lands, that will carry us through the next couple of decades in tier 1 type programs.
Okay, but so I think what our research is showing is that if you look at the average numbers, there's a bit of a decline. Mm-hmm. But if you go and drill deeper, there's a much higher decline, right, in productivity for privately owned players, while I think public players have been able to retain their productivity levels. I think a lot of your tenants are public companies, so they're probably, they have the resources, the technological capabilities to kind of be better stewards of those assets. I wonder if you agree with that, or do you see that a bit differently? I'm curious what you're thinking.
You're right. We do have a very strong presence from public companies and the larger Permian players, particularly in the Northern Midland and in the Delaware basins. So I think that's a fair assessment. I think in the places where we do have private companies that are coming in and developing, they are doing a good job. Now, we won't necessarily see the dynamic that you're describing, I think, because a lot of our private companies are developing in our Southern Midland Basin asset, and that's an area where I think you really are seeing people come in to an area where there was heavy development in 2014 or through 2016. The development came down. The well results really weren't what operators wanted to see, and there's a resurgence of people, I think, entering that space. And a lot of those companies are private, applying new completion technology or new artificial lift technology. So in that case, I think we're seeing an increase in type curves in that area, but that really has more to do with applying technology and ideas that worked in other parts of the basin and seeing better well results. But I could certainly see the trends that you're describing. I think the other dynamic is that university lands, because we have a very long-term vision and because we don't operate or develop the assets ourselves, come up with an independent assessment of the acreage. So our type curves aren't necessarily driven by anything other than assessing the data and determining what we think a reasonable well would make. And when we're looking at inventory, we're looking at all inventory across all the acreage. So our type curves aren't necessarily going to be as aggressive or as reflective of an operating strategy, for example, for a specific operator.
Okay, that's helpful. Allie, when it comes to offshore, you mentioned that there's like greater focus on not just the value that you're creating from these assets or from these from exploration in offshore plays, but there's also you're trying to balance the sustainability angle, emissions footprint, and all of that. So when you consider all of that, what are some like interesting areas or plays, if you will, from an offshore oil and gas point of view?
Well, from an offshore oil and gas point of view, it is a bit of a struggle, right? And there's only so much we can do. We have a lot of success, in what we do in the NCS in terms of electrification, things like that. That's harder to do for us in the GoM. There are things that we can look at later. We have the high wind Tampen project, which brings wind, to the Tampen projects in the NCS, and that's something that maybe in the future we could look at. Going forward, for right now, it's a portfolio aspect, and the GoM does offer us, relatively low emission, barrels. So, it's a great place for us to be from that perspective on a broader global portfolio view. And then it really is, who we partner with. That's critical for us, making sure that we have, some shared, values in that space and shared approaches and share same, shareholder and stakeholder drive in that space. So especially when we're non-operated.
And do you see that position changing? Do you see you assuming more operated assets as, I guess, new attractive plays show up, or is the emphasis more towards operating, let's say, renewable assets?
I think we take it in a case-by-case basis. So what's going to bring us more value? So we don't have any strong, decision one way or the other on what we're going to do in different places. It really is driven from a value perspective. So there are parts of the world where you'll have basin masters, and we certainly feel like we're one of those in the NCS, so we have a strong operated position in the NCS. There are other places in the world where maybe we get more value by working with a basin master in that area.
Yeah.
So, and that can, places like the GoM be driven by certain plays.
Yeah.
So really just approaching what's going to be best for the business case.